So I'm a professor of geography and planning at the University of Saskatchewan in the College of Arts and Science. My name is Scott Bell, and I do research that involves geographic information systems and mapping, but also on geographic information systems and mapping, how we use maps and GIS and spatial analysis to solve problems. Most of my work using the long form of the census and now more recently the National Household Survey is more directed at urban areas, some of the clustering that happens in urban spaces around class, race, ethnicity, culture, income, segregation, and clustering within cities. So my application and use of the National Household Survey and the long form is really keen on exploring the smallest units for which a variety of social and economic and education variables are available, and those are called dissemination areas. They're collections of blocks and block groups, usually have between 400 and 1,000 people. So there's this variable that I will call GNR, and that stands for Global Non-Response. And Statistics Canada knows to whom they're sending the long form or the National Household Survey, and they know from whom they're getting data back. And so they aggregate those non-responses for the National Household Survey, and they can get a count of the number of people or the percent of people in a unit of analysis that did not respond, that did not send it back. And during the sampling process of the National Household Survey, during the completion of the surveys, they went to great pains to try to encourage people who received the National Household Survey to complete it, because that first sampling was, in their minds, the correct sampling, a random sample by varying spatial units of analysis. And when I say units of analysis, I mean those areas of Earth's surface bounded by census borders, whether that's in a dissemination area, a block group, a census tract, census subdivision, or a census division. Yeah, so one of the first things we did as geographers and cartographers was map the data and look at the variability of global non-response in cities. And we saw what we call clustering. We saw that global non-response was higher in some areas and lower in other areas, and that dissemination areas and census tracts and neighborhoods that had high GNR were nearby or neighbors of other similar units that were also high in GNR, and correspondingly lower global non-response rates were clustered together, were together in space. And we weren't surprised by that. That's sort of the nature of the social dynamics that go on in cities. Similar groups tend to live together, whether we are classifying or understanding those groups of people based on income, culture, race, immigration status. They tend to live together. We tend to, as humans, live near other humans like ourselves. It is interesting, as time went on, as data was being released, it was being released increasingly at increasingly smaller units of analysis. We were getting a better or a finer view of the distribution of populations, a more authentic view that would be similar to the long-form census as Statistics Canada became more confident in the data and comfortable releasing it. But at some of those larger units, so if global non-response was greater than 50%, they don't release the data. They feel like it's an unreliable representation of that area, that over half of the people that received the survey did not complete it. One of the things they were doing when they were conducting the survey was oversampling in areas where response rates were low, trying to increase the response rate. But that has its own inherent sort of snowball bias, because if there's some social or economic or some other variable related to non-response, sending more surveys to people in that area are probably just exacerbating that bias, that the same people that are submitting it are going to submit it, and the people who are non-responders are probably going to continue to non-respond. It's just a different household of a similar set of characteristics. Our initial mapping included some mapping of these socioeconomic variables so we could get a visual sense of the arrangement of both GNR and things like income, education, lone parent households, houses that need repair, ethnicity, new immigrant status, those kinds of things. And then we ran a more complicated analysis where we try to predict global non-response at different levels of aggregation, so dissemination areas, using some of these socioeconomic variables that we could see had very similar patterns. So across 15, we did this analysis in 15 Canadian cities. We had to remove a few cities because their populations were too low for analysis, but every province is represented, and most cities all the cities have more than 100,000 people in them. And what we were finding consistently is that higher rates of social deprivation were positively related or correlated with or predicted global non-response. So where poverty is greater, where there is a greater percentage of the population that's new immigrant, where there is greater unemployment, lower education, and percent Aboriginal, we were finding higher global non-response rates. So those communities were producing less reliable data in the National Household Survey for themselves, for lack of a better way of saying it. We don't know who within a unit is responding. What we know is that for the unit, the neighborhood or the dissemination area, there's a certain rate of non-response, and it's greater in places where what we might call deprivation is greater. High healthcare needs, lone parent households, lower levels of education, etc. Absolutely. In terms of our GeoThink project and the kinds of organizations, government, non-government, and other agencies that benefit from and value open data, available data, are developing those kinds of policies and making decisions with that kind of data, the National Household Survey and the long form of the census are critical to understanding the possible service areas and the places where services might be delivered or where people might engage with certain subsets of the population. We have a sense of what those populations are in different places from the National Household Survey, but the varying rates of GNR and the higher rates in specific places is somewhat troubling. And I think that maybe the most interesting or valuable piece of results coming from the work I've been doing isn't at this point in time about finding solutions or tools that we can apply to the National Household Survey to improve its data, but is really that the patterns of non-response are pretty consistent across Canada. Some cities might have unemployment predicting GNR more than low income that's predicting it in another city, but those are really similar variables. And one of the things we're doing right now before we read up this paper is seeing if we can find a national model that predicts GNR that includes a suite of variables that is consistent across Canada. So that might mean for some cities using a statistical model that isn't as well fit to GNR as another one, but it is a model that fits for every city in Canada, and that's something that I think is most striking, is that we don't have to worry. Well, we can worry about and try to understand what's going on in an individual city, but we can see this urban representation of GNR and the social deprivation indices that predict it in every city in Canada, which and the level of clustering as well, that GNR, high GNR is near high GNR and low GNR is near low GNR in every city, and we have the maps